Well, hi there, Alberto Savoia here, author of the Write It, Why So Many Ideas Fail and How to Make Sure That Yours Succeed. And today I'm back to answer questions from readers of my books and watchers of my videos. So without further ado, let's jump into the question. The first question is from someone who calls himself Investigator 2. The question is, why do so many startups invest in the wrong idea? Well, it's referring to the fact that 80% of startups fail, if not more, and they fail not because they cannot execute, although some of them do, but mostly because they're building the wrong product, what I call the wrong it. So what leads them to fall into that trap? Well, the first answer is that entrepreneurs tend to fall in love with their idea, with their original idea, with the original version of their idea. So they fix in their mind what their solution is going to look like, what their product, their service, their company is going to look like. And as they go out and they do their market research, they do that with a bias, with a confirmation bias toward their solution. So they tend to discard negative feedback. They only look at the positive side, at the positive feedback. And most importantly, they don't collect real data. They just collect opinions. It could be their opinion or other people's opinions, and then they filter it. Why? Because just as romantic love makes you blind, you don't see the person fault. When you fall in love with the idea, you also become blind to the reality. And the reality is that most new ideas will fail. So this doesn't mean that there isn't a version or a variation on your idea that succeeds, that will succeed. It just means that the current idea as it stands, your odds of success are pretty low. But if you fall in love with it, you will ignore all the feedback, all the signals from the market. You proceed to go ahead with it. And so you fall in love with it. That's why most new startups fail. They fall in love with the ideas and they ignore the signal. So the next question comes from Stefania, and it's a little bit related to the first. And Stefania asks, why are you so against focus groups? So for those of you who may not be familiar with what focus groups work like, it's like this. Start again. The next question comes from Stefania. Stefania asks, why are you so against focus groups? So for those of you who are not familiar in focus groups, here's how they work. A company invites and sometimes pays people, brings them into a room and shows them or tells them about their new product, their new idea, and then solicits feedback of the kind, would you use this product? Would you choose this product over this other product? How much would you pay for it? Would you rather have it yellow or would you rather have it green? Now, focus groups seem scientific because you take all of these answers and then you put them into little charts with percentages and you can draw charts and maps. So when you go and look at it, it looks like data. But if you read the book, you realize that that's not the kind of data that we're after, because it's data without skin in the game. People just tell you their opinion, what they would do. Technically it's called a stated preference, which is different from a revealed preference. A stated preference is where people tell you, yes, I would buy this, or I would use this, or I would prefer this to that. And a revealed preference is when actually faced with the choice or the opportunity, they do something completely different. So stated preferences and revealed preferences are often very different. That's why focus groups are dangerous. And in my book, I have a chapter called Hocus Pocus Focus Groups, where I explain the faults and dangers of focus groups. And one of the things that I talk about is the fact that because focus groups happens in what I call thought land, so it's all abstract. This is our idea, and people tell you what they would do with their idea. It happens in thought land. You are likely to run into all kinds of problems, because when things are abstract, problems occur. So there are 4 distortions that I discuss in the book. So the first one is called the lost in translation problem. So you have your idea, it's very clear in your mind what your idea will do, but in the process of explaining it to people until it's concrete, they have their own biases. They view it and they distort it in their own way. So your view of the idea, of the product, of the service is very different from what people perceive it. The other one we talked about before is confirmation bias. We just like to keep the feedback from people that we get. We take the feedback we like, we ignore the feedback we don't like. A third problem is that as human beings, we're not very good at predicting what we will do with things. So when I first heard about Uber, first of all, I thought it was a terrible idea. Because in my mind, I thought, what is this? Strangers driving strangers from strange places without a taxi license or something. I thought it was a terrible idea, and I thought I would never use it. Then I kind of course, warmed up to the idea, and I thought, well, I will use Uber instead of taxis. However, what happened is that when Uber or Lyft are available, you use them in a different way that you would use taxi. So I made a couple of really bad predictions. First of all, I would never use the service. And then when I started to use it, I use it in a way that's very, very different than I would normally use it. So that's the another problem. And, you know, in the book, I go through all the 4 problems that happens in Totland, but that is my issue with focus groups, right? There is so much distortion, so much bias, so much built-in predictions that turns out to be wrong, that ultimately the information is not as relevant. And with prototyping, as I discussed, there is a better way of actually getting data from skin in the game from the market. So that's why I prefer not to use focus group, because there is a better alternative. Final question. Steve C. asks, if your prototyping experiments determine that there is little interest, how can you be sure that you set up the right experiment? Very good question. So what Steve is talking about is this. You have an idea for a product, you create your XYZ hypothesis, as I explain in the book, you create a prototyping experiment, and say your hypothesis, 20% of the people will buy super premium sushi at $20 a box, just to pick an idea. So that's your XYZ hypothesis. Then you do an experiment, and you go in a supermarket, say, and you just have 5 boxes of the super premium sushi that is twice as expensive as regular sushi, but it has real wasabi and the fish is more fresh, all of these things. So you do that experiment and you find out that instead of 20% of the people who buy packaged sushi, only, let's say, 2% of them buy. Do you stop that? How do you know that the experiment was set correctly? Well, as in scientific experiments, you need to have at least a couple of people so that you can be objective about it, right? One of the techniques I encourage people to do is to have an inventor or an entrepreneur, so somebody who's a sponsor of the idea, and then have somebody play the devil's advocate, or the, let's call it the investor. So the inventor thinks that their idea is wonderful and sets up an experiment, possibly with the unconscious bias to favor their idea. So the biased experiment toward a positive result. The way that you make it objective is to have somebody else look at your experiment, look at the data that you collect and how you analyze the data, to bring some objectivity to the result. So just as in scientific experiment, you would like to have a peer review, somebody who's more objective, looking at both the design of your experiment and at the data of your experiment and how you actually analyze the data. So it's always good to bring somebody that will criticize what you've done. Otherwise, you're going to fall victim to your own preferences, to your own confirmation bias. And also, I emphasize in the book, one experiment is never enough. So if you do an experiment, you expect 20% of people to be interested in your product and only 2% seem to demonstrate any interest. You do not stop there. You do not stop there. You don't just run one experiment, right? You want to do a number of experiments. The question is, how many do you need to do before you have a certain level of confidence that your idea is the right it or not the wrong it? Well, it depends. It depends on the design of the experiment. It depends on the results on the experiment. And in the book, I go through great detail to explain you exactly how you can design the experiments to be objectives, how do you analyze them in an objective way, and how to determine when you've experimented enough and you can reach a conclusion. So I hope this answers the 3 questions. By the way, I love doing this. I love questions. When I teach, office hours are my favorite thing. So please feel free to ask me questions. As you can tell, I'm very passionate. I love to answer them, and I will come back for more. Hopefully, you've read the book and you can use the book as a source for questions, for clarification. These videos are designed to augment and complement the book. In the meantime, this is Alberto. May you always find the right it in all aspects of your life, and I hope to see you back again soon for another version. Thanks again. Bye-bye.